Welcome into this video. Here's a quick overview of what we're about to cover in Adobe Illustrator. Well, we want to go ahead and create a new document size 1920 by 1080 and make a simple user interface style background. Really, it can be any background you like. Add a little rectangle, throw a fancy gradient in there to make it pop a little. Next, we're going to need to create a series of rectangles and use the properties panel to round off our corners and get the positioning just right. Smart guides are super useful here. They help you kind of click things together and make sure things are aligning correctly. We also want to use Pathfinder to help cut and round edges of shapes perfectly, and this is particularly important depending on the letters or numbers that you want to create here. And then all we need to do is throw in some semi-transparent gradients, layer them together with some overlay blend modes, some normal blend mode layers, different things like that. And before you know it, we're going to have our own nice, wonderful looking, bubbly number 3 today. Watch the full tutorial coming right up, and we're going to get into all of it right now. All right, so here we are in Adobe Illustrator, and here's just a little mock-up I put together of the number 3. And depending on the letters or numbers you're using, different letters and numbers are more conducive to looking cooler or less cool with this effect. Let's go File, New, and just create a new document here. I'm going to go with the Web Large 1920 by 1080, and I'm going to hit Create. The first thing I'm going to do, after just bumping my layer thumbnail size a little bit bigger, is grab the Rectangle tool, click a single time, and we're going to say, hey, go ahead and give me that 1920 by 1080 sized shape, and I'm going to drag it over. Now, this shape has a white fill and a black stroke. I'm going to select the black stroke, and I'm going to hit the little slash icon. Ignore Adobe's tooltips. They're always popping up. And then I'm going to take this shape. I'm going to go to my Align panel and just align to the horizontal and vertical centers here of my artboard. And then what I want to do, I'll double click on the fill. I'm going to bring my color picker over here, and I want to make this give this a very, very light gray. So I'm going to go F2, F1, ED. That should be a very, very light gray, just like that. And then I'm going to lock my background. You could name it as well. I'm not going to go through the hassle of doing that. I'm going to create another new layer here. We're going to create another rectangle. I'm going to click a single time because I know I want this rectangle to be 550 by 550. Once more, well, we can just give this any old color just so we can see it for the time being. In our Align panel, align to the horizontal and vertical centers of our artboard. Now we're going to select our Properties panel here, and underneath the Transform section, I am going to hit my little triple dot, the ellipsis here, to bring out, as you can see, more options, and we have rounded rectangle corners, or rounding the corners. I'm going to round my corners maybe like 25 pixels, so something like that. Let me just undo that. I'm going to set this back to 0 because, well, let me just erase it, set it back to 0. I want to make sure I turn on the link the corner radius values here, because then I can just punch in 25 once, and it just rounds the corners of my rectangle just like so. Now we want to fill this rectangle with the color white, so I'm just going to go, give me just straight white, and I'm going to apply a drop shadow to this as well. So I'm going to go Effect, Stylize, Drop Shadow. And we want this to be a very subtle drop shadow. So X offset of 0. We want the drop shadow just to be going straight down from our shape. So all we want is the Y offset. Y is up and down, X is left and right. So a Y offset of maybe like, I don't know, let's do 12, and then a blur of about 10 pixels should be fine. And then the opacity, just 10, maybe 15%. 10 is probably enough. We want it to be pretty subtle and pretty soft. So we'll hit OK. I'll deselect, and you can see what we've got. Just this nice little effect going on here. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to grab my text tool, and let's throw a little bit of text in here just because we can. I'm going to say glass numbers by Nathaniel Dodson, something like that. You maybe could use your own name. And here in the character panel, I'm going to look for, I have a font on here called Proxima Nova. I'm going to go Proxima Nova Light right here. And I'm going to change the fill, so I can just double click on the fill here. There's a million different ways you can change the color. I'm going to set the brightness to 40%. Now it's green because of the hue being at 104 degrees, but the saturation, I can just set it to 0, and that's just going to give me a nice, a little bit darker than medium gray. Hit OK, and just drag this text over and drop it somewhere up near that top left corner like so. Cool. We're just building a quick background. That's what's going on here. And I want to go ahead and lock this layer now. We're just locking these layers so we don't accidentally move things around or delete things, whatever. I'm going to create a new layer, and we are going to start building our icon now. So I'm going to select my rectangle tool, and I'm going to click a single time, and I want a 300 by 300 rectangle. I'm going to drag this to the middle. In fact, I'll just align this to the horizontal and vertical centers of my document as well. I am going to also transform this. Let's give this a corner radius of maybe like 60. Let's see what that looks like. That's pretty cool. And then we want to fill this with a gradient. Now there's a bunch of different ways we can do this. I'm going to hit the little gradient icon at the bottom of my toolbar, and we're going to make a couple different variations of this gradient. So we're working just with this rectangle shape now. I'm going to jump out to Google Chrome, and here in coolers.co/gradients, you have a bunch of different, just vibrant, sort of modern looking, subtle, maybe not so subtle, colorful gradients that just kind of look cool in a lot of modern user interface applications. So we're going to work with this sort of purpley, I don't know, peach color gradient. All you have to do is hover over one side, click. It's going to copy the color hex code to your clipboard. And then we would come in here in our gradient panel. I'm going to double click the white slider, open this up, and then hit the little hamburger menu in the top right corner and go RGB. And down here, I can punch in a hexadecimal code. So I'll just paste my color. So it's that really dark purpley color, and then I'll grab the peach color, and I'm going to do the same thing here with white. Go ahead and grab the RGB. There's the hex code, bing, cool. So we have our gradient, and I think I'll go ahead and just set it to like a 90-degree angle, and then I'm going to grab my gradient tool, and I'll probably just stretch the top out a little bit, something like that. In fact, I may select the bottom. I'm gonna come in here to HSB, and I'm just going to make the bottom a bit darker. So something kind of like that, maybe a little bit more saturated, but a little darker. Something like that for my first gradient. Cool. And now that we have our first gradient, let's do just a couple more real quick. So select the shape. We would go edit copy and then edit paste in front. So now you can see we have a second rectangle shape. In fact, I can lock the bottom one if I'm paranoid and I'm afraid I'm going to mess it up. Let's go back out here and choose maybe this, light and darker, or light and medium blue. So let's grab the cyan color and let's go for the light and set this back to RGB. Let's go ahead and paste that in there. Cool. And then we'll grab the darker blue and go to the darker side here and paste that hex code in. Cool. And then maybe what we'll do is let's set this one back to 0 degrees. So we'll just go left to right with that gradient. That looks kind of nice. And then we'll again go edit copy and then edit paste in front. Nice. I'll lock that other layer just so we don't mess it up. And then maybe we'll find, I don't know, something, maybe one of these, that green one is kind of cool. We go with one of the dark blue or the blue to green. There's all sorts. Let's do the teal one here. This one looks cool. So we'll go dark teal. So let's go ahead and select this, paste that in there, and then let's grab the light teal. And I'm double clicking and just going to paste it right in there. Cool. And then you can even do maybe an angle. There's all kinds of different things you can do here. I'll probably just go with the angle like that. So what we've just done is created just a series of backgrounds. Now when we create our glass icon on top of this, we can quickly swap the backgrounds and say, hey, how does it look? We're going to begin with this sort of, bluish purple to peach color first, and then we'll come back and play with backgrounds later. So I'm just going to lock that layer for now. Let's create a new layer, and I'm going to grab the rectangle tool once more, and I'm going to click a single time, and I am going to create a rectangle that is 110 pixels wide by 60 pixels tall. So this is going to be each piece of our three. So if I look at the finished three, essentially what we're looking at doing is create this top piece, the middle piece, the bottom piece, and then we'll worry about creating the sort of loops that link everything together. So this will be our top piece. Cool. In fact, if I open up my properties panel, it's 60 pixels tall, so I can go ahead and set a corner radius of 30. That's going to make it a perfect pill shape. 30 is half of 60, of course. So cool, that's nice. I can duplicate this shape now, so just hold down your Alt-Option key and drag out a copy, and you can click it right to the bottom. It's going to align it perfectly. That's happening because here under View, we have Smart Guides turned on, something that might be useful for you. So I just clicked out another copy of this, and then you can just line it up and have it align and sort of click to the middle of the shape on top of it here. But this shape, we need to be smaller. So the middle part of the three is going to be bumped in a little bit. So I'm going to select this here, and under the Properties panel, under Transform, I'm going to choose the anchor point here on the far right and in the middle, and I'm going to say, hey, width, go down to 90. And then I'm just going to double check here, and I want to make sure it's scaled down the corners. I've got scale corners checked on because I do dumb things like that sometimes. And I'm just going to change it back to 30. And now we have a couple different shapes that are just stacked right on top of one another. Now, I'm not going to be concerned about creating the bottom of the 3 yet, because if you can imagine here, I just want to create the top piece of the 3, and then we can duplicate that and flip it down and make the bottom part of the 3, and it'll be perfectly the same size and everything will be just right. So let's just focus on creating the top part of the 3 here. Now, if I take this shape and this shape, the height is 60 pixels for each of them. So together, of course, that's 120 pixels, but we want there to be a little bit of space between the 3. I mean, at least I do. Maybe you could do it together if you like. I want to add a little bit of space. So I'm going to add 8 pixels of space in between, or 8 clicks. So I'm going to select the bottom shape and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 with my bottom, where my down arrow key. I've got the black arrow tool selected, and you can see I've got these 2 shapes just like this. Well, I just added 8 pixels. Each of these is 60 pixels. 60 plus 60 is 120. 120 plus 8 is 128. So now if we grab our ellipse tool and we click a single time and say, hey, give me 128 by 128 pixel ellipse, and then we take this, and Smart Guides is turned on, so it should click us right into place here, and we click into place. If I change the color of this, you'll see we can, well, I've got a gradient selected, we can have this, I'll drag it beneath my 2 layers, we can have this, that it's going to run and create our perfect rounded back edge of the 3. Now the problem is there's all this extra purple circle now out here, so let's take care of that. We'll take care of that using our direct selection tool. We're going to select the anchor point right there, just a single anchor point, and hit delete. It's going to just cut our shape in half, and we want to add a little bit of roundness to the middle area because we just don't want that straight chopping line. So remember, it's 8 pixels of space, so let's create another ellipse here. So click a single time. This time we're going to go 8 by 8. Cool. I can change the color of this if I want, but I don't really want to. And then let's just drag this over, and we can see it's going to intersect perfectly with our half circle. Hold down Shift. You already have that little tiny ellipse we just created selected. Hold down Shift and select the larger half circle or semicircle. And I'm going to bump this out, maybe a pixel, a couple clicks, something like that. How does that look? That looks like that's more about what we need. I hope I didn't just mess anything up. And then I'm going to come over here to my Pathfinder panel. By the way, if any of these panels are not open in your version of Illustrator, just go Window and you can find them in here. See, Pathfinder's right there. And what we're going to do is just use this one, the subtract or minus front option, and it's going to punch that little hole right there. So you can imagine now, if I select all 3 of these shapes and I fill them all with the same purpley color, we have what is looking like one single shape. I should probably go something lighter, easier to see. When I don't hover over it, it looks like we've created one shape, but it's still 3 individual pieces. And I kind of want to keep it as 3 individual pieces for now. So how do we work with this and duplicate it? Well, let's grab all 3 of these shapes and we're going to group them together. This is not merging them into one shape. It's just grouping them. Object group. You can see it's a layer group. We can open up the layer group. The 3 individual shapes are still there. If I show you a darker version of it, see all 3, still 3 individual shapes there. Cool. I'm going to duplicate this layer. We're going to duplicate it and flip it over. So a number of ways we can do this. We'll just go Object Transform Reflect. And here we're going to say, hey, look, reflect along the horizontal axis. So it's going to flip it over like you would a calendar or something. And we're going to hit the copy button. So it's going to give us a second copy of this. Now we're not clicking anything because right now we have this entire layer group selected. See, it just duplicated that layer group. We're going to drag this down and we're going to let Smart Objects kind of guide us home. And there we go. We have both of these shapes. Now they're lined up perfectly, and we've created what looks a little bit like a 3, a big bubbly, weird looking 3, but a 3 nonetheless. We have the top and bottom of our 3 as these groups of shapes. Now, what I want to do, I like the editability of where we are, right? At this point, we can adjust and edit any one of these shapes. If I wanted, we could come in here to like the top shape and we could say, hey, give me this top shape here. We could go to the properties panel. We could open up our corner radius. We could unlink it and say like, hey, we want the top left corner to just be straight, a straight corner like that. And now we can make the bottom corner 60 pixels of radius, right? So you can then adjust your 3 and make something more like this. Now, I don't want to do that in this case, but when we have our shapes as individual shapes, we can do these kind of things with them because those live corners are preserved. But I want to be able to apply the semi-transparent gradient to this shape as an entire singular shape, and I want to have some other flexibility. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to select both of these layers by clicking on the circle here in the layer icon, holding down Shift, and selecting the other circle, and we're going to duplicate these. So we're going to go Edit, Copy, and then say, hey, edit, paste in front. It's just going to duplicate the layers, paste them right in place, and then we're going to shut off the 2 bottom layers. Those are like, stash those away, leave them there. We don't want to mess anything up. We can always come back to them when, or should I say, if we end up messing this up. So select the bottom of the 3. Let's just stack it properly here in the layers panel so we can see what's going on. Select the bottom piece of 3, and we're going to come down to our Pathfinder section here and just unite them. So bing, now we have one shape. And we're going to do the same with the top part of the 3, unite them, great. And now we begin adding our gradient. So let's go ahead and hit the gradient swatch here to just fill in a gradient. And I'm gonna double click on the left handle and we're just gonna say, hey, give me white. And then double click on the right handle and again, hit the white swatch. Now I'm gonna select the left handle here and I'm gonna change the opacity to 0. So what we're getting is a white to white gradient, but really all we're doing is saying, hey, fade from 0% opacity to 100% opacity. And I'm going to use a radial gradient here as well. You can mess with any of the types of gradients and do whatever you like. You'll see we're going to layer this effect. Then I'm going to grab my gradient tool and I'm going to begin drawing in a gradient. So where do I want the light to look like it's coming from? From the left maybe? So I can just redraw the gradient and say, have the absolute brightest part of my gradient or my numbers be over here on the right side. I kind of like that. Let's begin with that. Let's select the bottom shape. And all we have to do here is use our eyedropper tool and sample the top shape. It's going to give us the same 0% to 100% white gradient and a radial gradient. Now, the positioning's all wacky, but that's all right because it's glass. So we're going to just say, hey, look, we're just going to draw another shape down here and do something kind of like that. Cool. So we have the base of our 3. What I'm going to do is drag a selection over both of these layers, and Smart Guides should help me kind of align this to the middle of my shape, I think, somewhere in here. That might be close to the middle, and then I'm just going to align it using my eye the rest of the way. So something like that is probably good enough. And then I can duplicate this shape. So I can just select both of these layers. In the layers panel, we could copy and paste in front. You can select both layers in the layers panel like this and drag down to the new layer icon. And then on the new shape, again, grab the gradient tool and just totally redraw the gradient. So you could say, I want to completely change the gradient like this. And then I want to grab up here in the top and I want to completely fade away the gradient like that. And maybe what we'll do is we'll take both of these bottom layers and we're going to go to our properties panel again. So I've got the bottom part of the 3 and I'm going to change under here. If I hit the word opacity, I can change the blend mode to something like overlay, which will just help assume a lot of that color, whatever the color of our background is, up into the glassiness of our letter. And we'll do the same with the top part. Just the bottom piece of the 3 that we made originally. And I'm going to say overlay for that as well. And you can see this is really beginning to change the way this all looks. And at this point, I might come in here and say, all right, I want to change this quite a bit. I want to make a lot more transparency come through here. So I'm going to move this over. Maybe I'll redraw the gradient again, something like that. And then maybe I want to do the same thing up here where I want to really really have a lot more control over this. I want to come in here now and just say, look, you got to push yourself back a little bit. Maybe I got to do it more like that. And then we'll come up here to the top and you just keep adjusting and tweaking and editing the glassiness to your heart's content. I'm going to select both these shapes, Command or Control C, Command or Control F, that's copy and paste in place. And then again, I would just keep going with this. So I could just say, look, I want to go and just do a very subtle thing like that, or maybe I'm just going to go back to just selecting one piece of my gradient here, and I want to have a lot of transparency here, so kind of do a little bit of a hard edge. You can rotate your gradient, you can pinch it and flatten it down like this. When you do that, you can, let's say we start with a big gradient here, we could flatten it down just to give a little bit of a highlight. So we're giving a little bit of a highlight there on that edge. Then you can move the gradient around. You can start to pull that highlight down. Ooh, actually, I kind of like that. And a lot of it might be where you're just going to look at it and you're just going to play around with it and see what starts to look good or not. So if I take this, then maybe I rotate this to, because the thought would be, hey, maybe we're going to try to get this to sort of follow the contour of that top part of the 3, something like so. That's kind of cool. Let's move our gradient more like this. Can we sort of bring in more of our transparency, something like so. And then you just keep going and playing and fussing. And by the way, any one of these layers, I could select both of these, for instance, just reduce the opacity down to 50%. If you feel like there's not enough a glassy effect or something like that, you can do that with any of these layers. In fact, I might do it as well with the top layer. We might drop this down to like, 80% or something like so. Now, the last thing that I would do or explore doing here is just grab those top 2 layers, and we're going to duplicate them, Command or Control C, Command or Control F to paste them in place, and we're just going to fill these with a solid white. And just for the sake of keeping things straight, let's set these back to an opacity of 100%. Now, I am going to give this just a kind of a wacky color here so we can see it and see that it's completely different. You can see we have these 2 pieces over here in our layers panel that are red. Well, here I'm going to go to my properties panel, or you could do this in Pathfinder, and we are going to choose this option here. So we're going to intersect the shapes. Basically, we're only going to preserve the part of the shape where both shapes are overlapping. So that's going to be this sort of boat-looking shape we have in the center. So we're going to hit the intersect button, and you can see we just have that little shape that is left behind. Now we would go ahead and fill this. We can go ahead and just say, yeah, maybe go white or something. And then you could play around with this. What happens if I set this to soft light? Maybe soft light and reduce the opacity to 25%. Just give it a little bit more of a brightness boost to the middle. What happens if I select that shape and I go Effect, Drop Shadow, and apply some sort of drop shadow, maybe shooting off to the right side? So here we would say Y offset, we would go 0 with that, and then X offset maybe like 10. And then a blur of, 10 is probably fine, but then we would up the opacity to maybe 50, something like so, or maybe I would go even higher because we have already reduced the opacity of this layer. So we can hit OK. Let's bring the opacity of the layer up to just 75% for the sake of the argument here. And you can see that we have just a little tiny shadow. See that little shadow that's popping up and just adding a little bit more shape to our glassy 3. Now, once you have 3 that you like, or whatever letter or number that you're trying for, select all of your shapes. You see all these shapes we've created, and then just hit Command or Control G to group them together. And this is our 3 just as a whole here. And the final thing that I'd be remiss if I didn't show you is, well, let's try it with different backgrounds. So there it is with the light blue background, there it is with the teal background, and it's just going to begin assuming the color of that background with a very strong center. So the center of our 3 is still that really strong white color, but it's just kind of fun to go in and play with these gradients and see what kind of different effects you can get just by adjusting and fussing with a little gradient, a couple layers, a blend mode here and there, some opacity, of course. But yeah, that's going to be it for this one. Again, if you create it, tag me on Instagram. My Instagram is down in the description below. I'd love to see what you make. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.